Hi, this is Caleb Cain, and you're watching Cain Course World History. Today on Cain Course, we're talking all about rights.
Yo, Cain, you have the right to remain silent. See what I did there?
Yeah, good one, anonymous high school student, but that's not exactly what we're going for. We're talking about universal rights, not the rights that you have as an American, but more so the rights that you have as a human, which is a completely different idea that is new to the world thanks to the UN. And today we're going to unpack what it means to have rights as a human, and also what it means for the value of human life to change, as well as the human identity to change as the world becomes more globalized. There are three areas in the globalized world in which we see changes or reform to the way we used to think about people and rights in general. The first is that we see challenges to old assumptions. We're going to have new ways of believing and new roles for human nature across the board. The second is that there's an increased education access worldwide, and that's going to unlimit the opportunities that certain groups that usually were marginalized in the past have. And thirdly, we'll look at responses to a changing environment. We've discussed already how the environment is certainly changing in a globalized culture, and today we'll also look at how people respond to said changes. We have to give credit where credit is due. In order to challenge these old assumptions for our first section, we need something to make that happen, and that is the UN, the United Nations, which you might remember is a direct reaction to the events of World War II, or maybe more specifically, a direct reaction to the Holocaust. After the Holocaust, people around the world say, never again. But how do you go about preventing such a mass atrocity from ever happening again when there was so much clear hatred for one group of people? How do you get anything done in world history? You write a strongly worded document, of course. In this case, it's the Declaration of Human Rights, which is passed by the United Nations in 1945 as a direct response to the events of the Holocaust and World War II. Here's what the beginning of the document says. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Believe it or not, this document is a novel, new concept. Yes, we've had documents before that outline rights, like the Declaration of Independence in the United States, but we've never had something that was intended for all people, not just one specific nationality. This was for all people. And with that groundwork laid, we're going to see people being treated arguably better than they have been, because there is a framework for peace and for treating people the right way. Now, of course, this document will bring attention to ills of how people are being treated throughout the world, and there's other movements that will continue throughout the world as a result of this document. One such specific challenge to old assumptions is the movements of feminism, which started in the 1920s officially in the United States as women began to push for suffrage, which they eventually did receive. This is considered to be first-wave feminism and even spread to places like Japan and India, who shortly after the United States granted women suffrage. Second-wave feminism was featured in the United States following the events of World War II. As women became more and more involved in the workforce, they began to demand equal treatment with men. Third-wave feminism is prevalent in the world today as women still fight for equal rights with men, and especially in countries around the world where women are marginalized, women continue to fight for those rights. Other challenges to old assumptions during the globalized era include challenges to political orders or even religious thinking and social structure. Take, for example, the Negritude movement in French West Africa, which took pride in Africanism and was very similar to the ideas of Pan-Africanism we've seen before, and in many ways rejected Western influence. Or liberation theology, a movement in Latin and South America which combined Catholicism with socialism and took the teachings of Jesus to include freeing people from the abuses of economic, political, and social conditions. So much of this was meant to give religious significance back to these rights that people were demanding worldwide. Many religions also face changes in regards to fundamentalism or returning back to their roots. These renewal movements are very common in Islam, especially in the Middle East, which has had sort of a renaissance in regards to the Muslim faith. Globalization has also allowed knowledge and new ideas to spread. It's also made education more accessible, not just in places where education wasn't present, but it makes it available for people of all social classes and all ethnic and gender backgrounds. It allows anybody to learn. And with that, as more people get educated, we're going to see other changes as well. The significance of women's suffrage, something that happens all around the world by 1950 or so. But suffrage actually opened the door for new economic and job opportunities for women, as well as education, and women are becoming empowered, and that changes the role of women worldwide. Social classes begin to change as well. As many of you know, the 1960s were a time of major tumult in the United States as African Americans were fighting for their civil rights and the ability to be treated just like any other American. Activists such as Martin Luther King Jr. were instrumental in passing the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which totally changed the game for African Americans and eventually led to voting rights and overall equal treatment in the United States under that Civil Rights Act. But it's not only the United States where we see changes in social classes. There are well-established old styles of social class around the world, including India, which was still in the caste system as late as World War II. The caste system, which was specifically tied to the religion of Hinduism and put people in classes based on reincarnation, and even had a class called the Untouchables, and people who were out of caste, was extremely divisive in India and lasted all the way up until 1950 when a new constitution officially abolished it. But the caste system might not be the worst example of social class ills in the world. It's probably South Africa, which had an apartheid system, meaning a complete division of ethnicities. In this class, people of European white descent and people of traditional African descent. They were completely divided within their society, and that doesn't change until about the 1980s, 90s or so. Because of its colonial legacy, white people in South Africa remained in power going back to the days of imperialism, even though 85% of South Africa's population was Native African. Despite all this, these Native Africans were often dehumanized and restricted rights. In the 1960s, the president of the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela, was in prison for going against apartheid. It wasn't until about 1994, when he was released from prison, that steps were taken to create a new independent government with free elections that were equal for all. Despite the fact that all these movements have had success, and for the most part, people are gaining rights back, and there's a natural recognition of human rights around the world, that doesn't mean that every place is all free and happy. In fact, there's other places around the world that still restrict rights. China is a great example of this, as in the late 1980s, the Tiananmen Square massacre takes place, where student protesters who believe that China should take more progressive forms towards free speech and civil liberties were murdered in public. Worldwide challenges continue to occur in regards to free speech and political freedom. It's going to be impossible to have that worldwide because upper elites never want to give up their power overall. It's a continuing theme throughout world history, yet we have taken steps in the globalized era to a more free and independent world. And finally, the third aspect of reform that we see worldwide during this time is the overall response that we have to the environment. The environment has been changing, and there is a more progressive movement worldwide to take care of the environment. There's many examples of this, including the Greenpeace movement, which came out in the 1970s and followed a lot of the counterculture that was going on in the United States. But it tried to advocate for ending of nuclear testing and to bring attention to desertification and deforestation around the world, and still continues to do that. We've mentioned the Greenbelt movement before in Kenya, which was motivated not only by feminism and empowering marginalized women in Kenya, but also to give these people the tools necessary to create sufficient farms that also treated the environment properly and didn't use harmful tactics. Kenya, because of that, has grown in its ability to produce agriculture, and the survival rates have been much better because of this Greenbelt movement. And finally, in 1970, we had the introduction of Earth Day, a national holiday that is promoted by the UN and many organizations, in which we try to clean up the earth and bring recognition back to what the earth is and how important it is to us. A globalized culture certainly brings changes in technology and better connects the world and allows us to be more social, as we've discussed, but it also created a general understanding that humans are humans and there's certain ways in which we all are deserving of being treated. Again, never again do we want the atrocities that happened in World War II and the Holocaust and any genocide or social backlash that has happened since then. We're trying to prevent those things. So maybe the best part of globalization is the fact that it brings us all back to one true fact. We are all human, and we in fact share the same creator. He created us in his image, and there's a certain standard in which we should treat one another because of that, because of who we are. We're all the same. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. We are all the same. We're all struggling. We're all sinners, and we all need hope. And hopefully in this globally connected world, that hope is even more apparent now than it was ever. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.